The job paid $23.40 an hour, which was $3.90 more per hour than I had been making at the warehouse in Billings. There was a housing stipend, a uniform allowance, and a start date of March 3rd. I had been unemployed for 11 weeks. My landlord had given me a notice. My car needed a timing belt that I could not afford. So when the seasonal position with the Yellowstone Resource Protection Division came up in a listing on a federal employment board, I applied the same afternoon. I did not research the position carefully. That is the honest account of how it started. I had done park work before, summers during college, trail maintenance at a state forest in Oregon. I understood that overnight resource protection was not glamorous work. I understood it would be cold. I understood that the park covered 2.2 million acres and that I would be assigned to a specific zone, and that my zone would be a fraction of that, and that my job was essentially to be a consistent human presence in an area that needed one. I understood all of that. None of that understanding was useful, as it turned out. I drove from Billings on a Thursday in late February, with the pass still carrying snow at the edges and the caldera spread out below me in the early afternoon, pale and enormous and almost completely empty of tourists. In summer, that park holds 30,000 visitors a day. In the last week of February, it holds almost none. That absence has a texture to it. It sits on the landscape like something settled rather than something missing. I want to be specific about my state of mind when I arrived. I was not anxious. I was not superstitious. I was 34 years old with a practical disposition and an immediate financial problem. I was looking forward to having a steady schedule. The orientation took place in a low building near the south entrance. There were 4 of us starting that week. 2 were returning seasonals. 1 was a retired fish and wildlife officer from Idaho named Pruitt, who did not introduce himself as retired until the second day. I was the 4th. The supervisor who conducted our initial orientation was a compact woman named Calloway, who wore her hair pulled back and spoke the way people speak when they have explained something many times and are not interested in explaining it badly this time or any subsequent time. She covered the standard material first. Radio protocols. Incident reporting, the boundary coordinates of our respective zones. Weather response procedures. The chain of command for escalating a medical event. All of this was delivered from a laminated binder and ran for approximately 3 hours, and it was entirely normal, and I took notes in a small spiral notebook I had brought for the purpose. Then she closed the binder. She produced a second document from a folder that had been sitting flat on the table since we arrived. She set it in the center of the table. She did not make a ceremony of it. She said, "This is the supplementary operating protocol for overnight personnel assigned to the thermal zone quadrants." She said, "This is not in the main binder." She said, "You will each receive your own copy, and the copy stays in your possession at all times during shift, and the copy does not leave the park boundary." She said, "Read it now, and then we will discuss procedure." The document was 5 pages, printed on cardstock heavier than standard, laminated in a sleeve that had been done by hand rather than machine, the edges slightly uneven. One corner of the laminate lifted and repressed. The font was a plain serif, probably Times New Roman, at approximately 11 point. The pages were numbered in the bottom right corner. The header read, "Supplementary Operating Protocol, Thermal Zone Night Personnel, version 4.1, amended October 2019. There was a line beneath the header, in a different, slightly smaller font, that read, "Previous version 4.0, deprecated following the Brannick incident. September 2019. No further details were given about the Brannick incident. No further details were ever given about the Brannick incident. I am going to reproduce the rules here as accurately as I can from memory and from the notes I made that evening. I will note where the text included amendments, and I will note where the handwriting appeared, which was rare but notable. Supplementary Operating Protocol, Thermal Zone Night Personnel, version 4.1. Personnel assigned to thermal zone quadrants will begin each overnight shift by performing a full perimeter log of their assigned zone boundary. The log must be completed within the first 47 minutes of shift commencement. Times must be entered in handwriting, not by stamp or digital entry. If a section of the perimeter log cannot be completed within the 47-minute window for any reason, record the incomplete section. Note the time of interruption, and continue the log before beginning any other assigned activity. Do not skip the incomplete section and return to it. Complete it in sequence. 2. You will be assigned a primary observation post within your zone. The post has a fixed position. You are not to move the post. If you arrive for a shift and the post has been moved, do not touch it. Photograph it in its current position, record the displacement distance in your log, and contact dispatch. 3. Thermal vents in your assigned zone will be numbered on your zone map. During the perimeter log and at 90-minute intervals thereafter, you are to record the visual status of each numbered vent. The visual status options are active, reduced, absent, or modified. Do not use any other descriptor. If a vent presents a condition you cannot classify using those 4 terms, record its number, note the time, and write "See Supervisor" in the status field. Do not attempt to describe the condition in your own words in the log. 4. Between the hours of 01:13 and 04:47, personnel will not approach within 23 yards of any numbered thermal vent displaying an active status, and will not approach within 11 yards of any numbered thermal vent displaying a modified status. These distances are minimum thresholds. Exceeding the minimum distance during these hours is encouraged. The rationale for this protocol is not covered in this document. 5. If you hear a tone during your shift, a sustained sound of consistent pitch that does not appear to originate from wildlife, weather, or mechanical sources, do not attempt to locate the source. Log the time, approximate duration, and whether the sound appeared to be directional or ambient. Continue your scheduled activities. Do not mention the tone to other personnel in the field during the shift. Report it at shift end through the standard supplementary log form, not through radio. 6. Your zone contains 1 or more geothermal pools. You will receive their coordinates. You will not approach within 31 yards of any pool during hours of darkness under any circumstances. This rule has no exceptions. This rule does not have exceptions for rescue operations, equipment retrieval, or supervisor instruction delivered by radio. If you receive an instruction by radio during hours of darkness to approach a pool, do not comply. Log the instruction verbatim and report it at shift end. 7. You will be issued a handheld thermometer calibrated for surface temperature reading. At each 90-minute check, you will take a reading of the ambient air temperature at your observation post. You will also take a reading at the perimeter of your zone at its northernmost point. You will record both. If the perimeter reading is more than 7 degrees warmer than the post reading, contact dispatch. If the perimeter reading is more than 14 degrees warmer, leave your zone by the designated southern egress route immediately. Do not use the northern or eastern egress routes in this circumstance. Do not collect your equipment bag. Take your log and your radio and leave. 8. You may encounter the smell of sulfur during your shift. This is normal and requires no action. You may encounter an intensification of this smell that occurs rapidly, within 1 or 2 minutes, in an area where the smell was previously absent or low. If this occurs, move laterally. Do not move toward the intensification. Do not move directly away from it. Move at a 90-degree angle to the direction from which the smell is most concentrated, for a minimum of 73 yards. And then resume normal activity from your new position. If you encounter another person in your zone during overnight hours, greet them. Ask them their name and their assigned zone. Record both in your log. Do not attempt to escort them out of your zone. Do not follow them if they leave. If the person does not respond to a greeting, or responds in a way that does not address your questions, log the encounter as an unresolved contact and contact dispatch. Do not continue to engage with the person. 10. At the conclusion of each shift, you will complete a full written log on the standard form. You will note any anomalies in vent status, temperature differentials, sounds, contacts, or post-displacement. If your shift passed without any item requiring notation under those categories, you will write clear in the anomaly field. You will not leave the anomaly field blank. A blank field will result in your log being returned for resubmission and will delay your relief personnel's shift commencement. The system requires a positive confirmation of normal conditions, not an absence of documentation. Calloway did not ask if we had questions when the reading period ended. She asked, specifically, if we had questions about the procedural execution of any rule. She was willing to discuss how to do a thing. She was not, she said, in a position to discuss why the rules were structured as they were, and she said this without apology or evasion, the way a professional delivers information that is simply outside the scope of what she has been authorized to share. Pruitt, the retired fish and wildlife officer, asked about Rule 9. He asked what an unresolved contact typically indicated. Calloway said, "It indicates the contact was unresolved." She moved on. My first shift began at 10 p.m. on March 7th. The zone I was assigned was Quadrant 6, which sat on the northeastern edge of the main thermal basin, away from the major visitor infrastructure. In summer, this area is accessible via a boardwalk. In early March, the boardwalk is closed, and the ground between the vent fields carries a thin crust of snow over a substrate that is in places soft and in places not, and you learn very quickly not to assume that the surface will behave consistently. I performed the perimeter log. It took 44 minutes. I have done faster work since, but the first night I was careful about my pace and my footing. The vents were numbered 1 through 17 on my zone map. All 17 read active on the first check. The air had the steady sulfur background that Calloway had described, cold and mineral, and it sat in the back of the throat when you breathed through your mouth. My observation post was a wooden structure roughly the size and shape of a large mailbox mounted on a steel post, positioned at the center of the zone's southern section. Inside was a clip for the log forms, a spare pencil, a thermometer in a hard case, and a card laminated identically to the supplementary protocol, which contained only the zone map and the egress routes. The first 3 nights were uneventful, in the narrow sense that nothing occurred that required a notation in the anomaly field. I wrote clear 3 times. I performed the perimeter logs. I took the temperature readings. The differential between the post reading and the northern perimeter reading averaged 4 degrees, which was below the action threshold. I fell into the rhythm of the 90-minute intervals quickly, the way you fall into any repetitive scheduled work. The body accommodates it. On the 4th night, vent 11 read absent. I checked twice, once from 31 yards and once from approximately 25 yards, which was within the permitted approach distance, because it was not during the restricted window. The vent had been active on every previous check. I recorded the status. I moved on. At the next 90-minute check, vent 11 was active again. I recorded that. I reported it at shift end through the anomaly field as required. I was not contacted about it. I assumed this was normal. A thermal system is not static. Conditions change. I had no prior experience with geothermal monitoring, and I was not going to overinterpret my own unfamiliarity. The sixth night, vent 7 read modified. Modified was the one status classification in the rules that had no further explanation attached to it. Active, reduced, and absent were all legible in their obvious sense. Modified implied a change, but a change from what to what was not specified. When I looked at vent 7, it was producing vapor in the normal way. Consistent height, consistent color, consistent dispersion pattern given the wind, but the edge of the vapor column had a quality to it that I could not classify as active, because active implied a steady, known state. And this did not feel steady. It felt like a version of active that had been adjusted slightly towards something I did not have a reference for. I wrote modified. I moved to a distance greater than 11 yards and continued my check. It was not during the restricted window. It was 11:40 p.m. The rule specified the 001:13 to 04:47 window. I was within my rights to be at 11 yards. I noted this in my log along with the status, because the specificity of the restricted window implied to me that something about the modified condition was different during those hours than at other times, and I wanted the log to reflect my awareness that the reading was taken outside the window. Vent 7 read modified at the next 2 checks as well, which put the last check at 02:23 am. I observed it from 13 yards, which was 2 yards beyond the minimum threshold, because I was being precise. The vapor column had changed. The edge definition I had noted before was more pronounced. The column moved against the wind direction for approximately 4 to 5 inches at the apex before breaking up. Wind displacement of vapor is common. Displacement against the wind direction is not wind displacement. I wrote this in my log. I also noticed, while writing, that I had been standing in the same position at the perimeter of the note taking distance for 17 minutes, which was longer than the task required. I had not been thinking about anything specific. I had simply stopped walking and stood there and looked at the vent and taken no additional readings and made no additional notations until I became aware of how long it had been. I walked back to my observation post and completed the log entry and resumed my patrol. The smell intensification happened for the first time on the 9th night. I was between vent 3 and vent 4, approximately 40 yards from either, when the sulfur concentration in the immediate air jumped from the background level to something dense enough that it tightened the sinuses. There was no gradual increase. The background was present, and then something more than the background was present, and the transition was less than a minute. I executed the lateral movement the rule described, 90 degrees from the direction of maximum concentration, which placed me moving northwest, and I walked 73 yards by pace count and stopped. The intensification was gone within 2 minutes of my moving. I stood at my new position. The background sulfur was present. The dense concentration was not. I logged it. I continued my shift. I did not hear a tone that night. I did not observe a modified vent status that night. I noted in my log that the intensification event and the modified status events had not so far occurred on the same night, and I flagged this as potentially relevant without characterizing it further, because characterizing it would have required me to propose a mechanism, and I had no basis for proposing a mechanism. Pruitt called me on the radio at 3:40 a.m. He was assigned to Quadrant 4, which was adjacent to mine to the west. He asked if I could hear something. I told him I could not, and I asked him to describe it. He said it was a tone. It was consistent in pitch. He was not sure if it had a direction. I told him what the rules specified: log the time, duration, and whether the sound appeared directional or ambient. Do not attempt to locate the source. Report at shift end through the supplementary log form, not through radio. There was a pause. He said he had been moving toward it before he called me. I told him to stop moving toward it and return to his post. He did. We confirmed this at shift end. He had traveled approximately 210 yards in the direction of the sound before stopping. He was embarrassed about it in the way that competent people are embarrassed when they have done something procedurally incorrect, not in the way that frightened people are embarrassed. He said it was a compelling sound. He said it was the kind of sound that makes you feel like you know where it's going before it gets there. He could not explain this more precisely, and he did not try to. He submitted his supplementary log that morning. I submitted mine, noting the radio contact, noting that he had been in motion toward the source before halting, noting the approximate distance of the movement. 2 days later, at morning briefing, Callaway distributed an amendment. It was a single page, laminated in the same hand-done style as the main document. It was labeled Supplementary Protocol Amendment 4.1a. The text was as follows, reproduced as accurately as I can manage. Supplementary Protocol Amendment 4. 1a Addendum to Rule 5 Event. Personnel who become aware that another zone officer has been in motion toward a tone event source should document the direction of motion as precisely as possible. This information is collected for operational analysis and does not reflect negatively on the officer involved. Tone events have a documented effect on directional judgment that is not volitional and is not a product of inattention or poor procedural compliance. Addendum to Rule 4 Restricted Approach Windows. The restricted window applies to any personnel who have been present in the zone for 6 or more consecutive nights, regardless of clock time. Personnel who have completed 6 or more consecutive nights in the same zone should apply the restricted approach distances at all hours, not only during the 0113 to 0447 window. This applies immediately upon reaching the 6-night threshold. Personnel should self-monitor this threshold. Supervisors will not always be in a position to track individual officers' consecutive shift counts. These amendments are effective immediately. Insert this page into your protocol document behind page 2. No one asked Callaway to explain the amendment. She had not explained the original rules. There was no reasonable expectation that she would explain an amendment to them. I noted that night 9 was my 9th consecutive night in Quadrant 6. The restricted approach distances now applied to me at all hours. I updated my operating practice accordingly. Night 11 was when I heard the tone for the first time. I was at the northern perimeter taking the temperature reading. Post reading had been 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Northern perimeter reading was 26 degrees. Within the action threshold. I was writing the numbers in my log. The tone began. It was single-pitched, lower than I expected from Pruitt's description, not high and not resonant, somewhere in the register of a sustained note from a brass instrument played at medium volume, though without any of the warmth of brass. It had a paper quality to it. It had edges. I wrote the time, 02:11 a.m. I wrote tone event, onset. I wrote pitch low, approximately 130, 140 if I were to estimate. I wrote, "Does not appear directional." I then waited. The tone continued for what I timed at 6 minutes and 44 seconds and then stopped. I wrote the duration. I wrote, "No perceived direction." I went back to my perimeter circuit. I did not feel compelled to move toward it. This is what I noted to myself internally. Pruitt had felt compelled. The amendment had confirmed that compulsion was a documented effect. I had not felt it. I want to be careful here, because I do not know if the absence of compulsion means something. It might mean I am not susceptible to whatever the mechanism is. It might mean the tone event I experienced was less significant than Pruitt's. It might mean the rule about not mentioning the tone to other personnel during the shift had some operational function I could not identify, and that Pruitt's experience had been altered in some way by our radio contact. I logged this reasoning at shift end. I was told by Calloway, when she reviewed it, that the reasoning was noted and filed. She did not indicate whether it was correct. On night 14, Vent 9 disappeared from the map. I mean this precisely. My zone map listed vents 1 through 17. Between my night 13 shift and my night 14 shift, vent 9 had been removed from the map. A replacement map was in my observation post when I arrived. Vent 9 was not on it. Vents 1 through 8 and 10 through 17 were present. The gap in the sequence was not explained. The physical location where vent 9 had been was still present. There was an opening in the ground. It was producing vapor. The vapor had an edge definition that I recognized from vent 7's modified readings in the earlier weeks. I could not record this because the vent did not have a number, and the status log required a vent number. I wrote in the remarks section, "Former vent 9 position appears active. Status appears modified. No classification possible without official designation." I left it at that. I did not approach within 23 yards of it at any point during that shift or any subsequent shift. The amendment's all hours restriction applied to me. I applied the active threshold as the conservative choice, since the modified threshold of 11 yards was closer. I applied the larger distance. The perimeter temperature differential on night 14 was 9.4 degrees. I contacted dispatch as the rule required. The dispatcher recorded the reading and asked me to take a second reading at the same location, which I did. The second reading was 9.7 degrees. The dispatcher said, "Continue your shift as normal and notify immediately if the reading reaches 12 degrees or higher at your next check." I agreed. I asked, because I believed the question was operationally relevant, whether I should apply the 12-degree threshold rather than the 14-degree threshold given the trending pattern. The dispatcher paused. Then she said, "The protocol threshold is 14 degrees. I said I understood. She disconnected. At the next 90-minute check, the differential was 7.1 degrees. It had dropped. I recorded. I did not contact dispatch. I wrote in my log, "Differential dropped below action threshold. No further contact required per protocol." The shift continued without further anomaly. I wrote "clear" in the anomaly field and then crossed it out and wrote a summary instead, because clear was not accurate and the form did not have a category for complex. Calloway reviewed my log the following morning and said I should use the anomaly field for what it was designed for and put extended notes in the remarks section. I said the anomaly field had a 4-line limit. She said I should use the remarks section for overflow. I said the remarks section was pre-printed with the heading equipment notes only. She looked at me. She said, "Use the remarks section." Night 19, the restricted window. 01:13 to 04:47. I was on my third patrol circuit of the shift, approaching the eastern boundary. The former Vent 9 location was ahead of me and to the left. I was approximately 40 yards from it, well outside my self-imposed boundary. The vapor column from the former vent 9 was taller than I had seen it. It was producing more volume. And it was not dispersing. Normal geothermal vapor disperses. It rises, it broadens, it softens at the edges, and becomes indistinguishable from the ambient air at some height. This column did not. It rose to approximately the height of a tall person, perhaps 6'5" to 7 feet, and then it stopped. The top of the column was defined. It had an edge. The edge was not the gradual diffusion of moisture into cold air. It was a boundary. The column rose to that boundary and went no further, and the vapor massed there, dense and white, and did not scatter. I stopped walking. I was 40 yards from the vent. I was within the rules. I was at no point tempted to move closer. What I felt was not fear in the way the word is usually used. What I felt was a clear and total understanding that I was looking at something that had noticed me. I cannot locate this as a sensation in any specific part of my body. It was more like a shift in the informational content of the environment, the way you know a room is occupied before you see anyone in it, but much more precise. The tone began at 02:43 am. It was the same pitch as before. This time it had a direction. It was coming from the column. I followed the protocol. I did not move toward it. I did not move away from it directly. I moved laterally, because the tone and the modified status were both present, and neither the tone protocol nor the approach protocol covered the combined condition explicitly, and I defaulted to the more restrictive interpretation. I moved at 90 degrees and walked 73 yards and stopped. From that new position, the column was not visible. The tone continued for 4 minutes and 11 seconds from my original position onward. I logged the full duration. I logged my lateral movement. I logged the time and the new position. I did not log what I believed the column had been doing, or what I believed the convergence of the tone and the modified status indicated, because I had been told by the rules that I was not to describe conditions I could not classify, and I could not classify what this was, and the rules had given me no category for it, and I respected that. The rules had been written by people who knew more than I did. The blank field was not my place to fill. The tone ended. The column, when I returned to a position from which I could observe it, had returned to its normal dispersing pattern. Vent 7, checked afterward, read active. I logged everything and went back to my post and waited for the end of the restricted window and completed my shift. Night 22 was the worst of it. The perimeter log at shift commencement read normal across all 16 remaining numbered vents. The temperature differential at the northern perimeter was 5.2 degrees, which was within normal range. My observation post had not been displaced. I completed the first 90-minute interval without incident. The zone was quiet in the way it was often quiet, the background sounds of a geothermal field at night, which are many and layered, and which the ear learns to read as a baseline rather than as individual events. At 01:31 am, 18 minutes into the restricted window, vent 14 went from active to absent in the interval between one check and the next. I recorded this. I did not approach. I continued the patrol circuit. At 02:02 am, vent 14 returned to active. At 02:02 am, former vent 9's position went modified. I had not been looking at it directly. I was recording vent 14's return. I looked up, and the column from the former vent 9 position was in its defined, non-dispersing configuration. The top edge was present. The vapor was massing at the boundary. This time, it was approximately 8 to 9 feet in height, rather than the 6.5 to 7 feet I had measured before. The sulfur intensification followed immediately after, not from the former vent 9 direction, from the north, from the direction of the perimeter I had just come from. I turned and the concentration was behind me. I was between it and the column. Rule 8 said, move laterally. I had one anomaly in front of me and one behind me, and the lateral movement would take me to one side, and neither the rules nor any amendment addressed what you do when you are positioned between two concurrent events that individually require lateral movement in opposite directions. I made a decision. I moved toward the former vent 9 column, not away from it. I made this decision because the sulfur intensification rule was the one that had an explicit mechanism for movement, and the column had a known minimum approach distance, and a known approach distance is better than no distance at all. I moved to exactly 23 yards from the column. I stopped there. The column was at 23 yards. The sulfur intensification was behind me. I did not move toward the intensification. I did not move away from the column. I stood at the margin of the approach threshold and I waited. At 23 yards, the column was large. The tone began at 02:14 am. It had a direction this time, same as the previous night. It came from the column. It was the same pitch. The duration was longer. I timed it at 11 minutes and 53 seconds. During those 11 minutes and 53 seconds, I completed my log entries for the current check. I recorded Vent 14's return to active. I recorded the former Vent 9 status as modified. I recorded the sulfur intensification behind me. I recorded the tone onset. I completed the temperature readings. The post reading was 24 degrees. I could not complete the northern perimeter reading because the northern perimeter was where the intensification was, and the intensification was where I could not go. I noted this in the log. I substituted my current position reading, which was 29 degrees. I noted this as a substitute reading and not the standard measurement. The tone ended. The sulfur intensification dissolved within approximately 90 seconds of the tone's ending. The column began to disperse. Not suddenly, but steadily, the way vapor normally disperses, widening and softening at the edges until it was no longer a column and was only the passive output of a geothermal opening in the ground. I waited 14 minutes before moving. I did not time this deliberately. I looked at my watch after the fact and noted 14 minutes had passed, and noted this in the log and continued my shift. The remaining 2 hours and 33 minutes of the restricted window were uneventful. I completed the perimeter log. I took the readings. Former Vent 9 read no status as it had no designation. I wrote in the remarks section, former Vent 9 returned to non-modified configuration at 02:34 am approximately. Vent 14 read active at all subsequent checks. I wrote clear in the anomaly field. I then wrote a note beneath it, see remarks. Callaway had told me to use the remarks section. I used the remarks section. Night 22 was the worst night I had in Quadrant 6 during that assignment. I want to be precise about what made it the worst, not because it was the most extreme event, but because it was the first time I made a procedural decision that was not covered by the rules. Every previous choice had been rule compliant. The decision to move to 23 yards of the column as the better of two options was mine. The rules had not told me to do it. The rules had also not told me not to do it. I existed in a gap between explicit protocols, and I filled the gap with a judgment call. And the outcome was that the shift ended and I was not harmed. Whether my judgment was correct is a separate question from whether the outcome was acceptable. I understand that distinction. I remained in Quadrant 6 through the end of my assignment, which concluded April 28th. I had 61 nights total. The restricted window anomalies occurred on 14 of those nights. The tone event occurred on 9 nights. Former Vent 9 presented a modified status on 21 nights. No other vent except Vent 7 ever presented modified, and Vent 7 did so only twice after the initial period and not during the restricted window on either occasion. The perimeter temperature differential exceeded the dispatch threshold twice. The 9.4 degree event on night 14, and once more on night 31 when it reached 11.8 degrees, and dropped back to 8.1 by the following check. I was not asked to leave early. I was not reassigned. I was given a standard end-of-season evaluation that noted my log quality as above average and my procedural compliance as consistent. The evaluation did not reference the anomaly field entries or the remarks sections. It was a standard form, filled out in standard language. My replacement was a younger officer named Selig. I was asked to do a single overlap shift with him, to walk him through the zone. This is standard for seasonal positions. I was not authorized to show him the supplementary protocol. He would receive his own copy through the standard orientation. I was not authorized to tell him about specific incidents or anomaly patterns from my shift record. Calloway had made this explicit in a brief conversation on my last full shift. What I was authorized to do was walk the zone with him and show him the features, the vent positions, the perimeter, the egress routes, the observation post. I was authorized to explain the physical terrain and the equipment and the log procedure. I did all of this. When we reached the former Vent 9 position, Selig looked at it. He asked if that one was on the map. I told him it was not currently assigned a designation number. He asked why not. I said I did not know the current status of the designation question and that he should direct any questions about vent classification to his supervisor. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Does anything ever happen with this one specifically?" I looked at the vent. The vapor was dispersing normally. The column had no edge definition. The temperature was within background range. There was nothing to see. I told him, follow the supplementary protocol. Follow the amendment. Take your readings. Stay within your distances during the window. If you hear a tone, log it. Do not locate it. Do not mention it by radio. Trust the document. He nodded. He wrote something in his own small notebook. He did not ask further questions about that particular vent. I drove back through the north entrance that evening past the closed winter gate onto the highway, heading toward Billings. The timing belt still needed replacing. The pay had been regular, and the housing stipend had covered the gap. These were the material outcomes of the assignment, and they were what I had needed them to be when I accepted the position. I submitted my final log the following Monday. The anomaly field on the last night read, clear. It was true. The shift had been clear. The supplementary protocol was not mine to keep. I returned it with my equipment on the last day. My copy was filed in whatever system they use for such things. I have no copy of it now. What I have is this account, which I have tried to construct with the same standards I applied to the log entries, specific, sequential, and limited to what I can confirm actually occurred. There is something I have not said, which I will say now, in the interest of completeness. Rule 9 contains the unnumbered handwritten edition that says, "Do not look back at them after you have turned away." This edition was not initialed, unlike the Calloway editions. It was in a different pen. It appeared to have been written on a different occasion from the typed text and from the Calloway editions. I encountered an unresolved contact once, on night 38. A person at the eastern boundary of the zone. I greeted them. They did not respond. I asked their name and their assigned zone. They did not respond. I logged the encounter as an unresolved contact and contacted dispatch per the protocol. The dispatcher acknowledged. I turned and resumed my patrol as the rule implied. I did not look back. I do not know if this mattered. The rules do not explain why things are rules. The rules explain what to do, and the record shows that doing what they specify produces a survivable outcome. That is the function of a rule set. That is the only outcome the rule set promises. Not understanding, not safety in any total sense, not the absence of the thing you are not looking at, just continuation. I work a different position now. The work is daytime and involves a desk and is in no way comparable to Quadrant 6. I was asked by someone in the division in an email I received 3 weeks after my end date whether I would be interested in a second season. The email did not specify a zone assignment. It said only that my compliance record was strong and that my documentation approach had been noted positively by the team. I did not reply immediately. I considered the question for several days. I thought about the 14 anomalous nights out of 61. I thought about the judgment call on night 22, and whether I had been correct, and whether correct was even the applicable category. I thought about Selig, who was presumably now in Quadrant 6, receiving his own copy of the supplementary protocol and his own orientation walk and his own first perimeter log in the dark. The system continues without any particular person's participation. The protocol exists, the amendment exists, the vent numbers exist, -1. The restricted window operates on its own schedule, 01:13 to 04:47 every night, independent of who is standing inside the zone or what they know or what they are trying to avoid knowing. I accepted the second season offer on a Wednesday evening. I sent a single-line reply. The start date was confirmed 3 days later. There is no adequate explanation for why I did this. I have tried to construct one and found that the pieces do not fit together in any sequence that produces a clean reason. The pay was the same. The position was not professionally advantageous. I did not enjoy the nights in any ordinary sense of the word. What I can say is this: the protocol works. The rules are not perfect. They have gaps, as I have documented. But they have been argued over and amended and revised through numbered versions, and they represent the accumulated procedural knowledge of people who faced the same conditions before me and resolved those conditions well enough to write the rules down. And someone found the rules insufficient in September 2019 and an incident they named after a person. And someone added to the rules afterward, and the rules were better for it, and I read those rules and I followed them, and I am here. That is not nothing. The second season starts March 3rd. Zone assignment has not yet been confirmed. I am prepared for it to be Quadrant 6 again. I would understand that assignment. The documentation there is more complete than most, and a zone with good documentation is a zone that can be worked safely, assuming you read the documentation and treat it as the thing it is. Not a curiosity, not a formality. A record of what has already happened, written by the people it happened to, for the use of the people it will happen to next. Former Vent 9 is still there. I know this because I checked the zone status report before I accepted. It is still listed without a designation number. The status field next to its map coordinate reads, in the column reserved for current classification, pending review. It has read that since at least October 2019. I assume someone is reviewing it.